Welcome, everyone, to this podcast on a pilot career. And I want to cover more than just the superficials of what this airline pilot career involves. I think very much there is a tendency to think of the superficial things, but not really have much knowledge or exposure to what the depth of this career is and some of the nuances that are associated with it. So that'll be the purpose of this podcast, a YouTube video, because I'd really like to cover some of the in-depth areas that can help you think a little bit further about what this career involves. I guess I'd start off with what attracted you to consider an airline pilot career. I honestly think that has some importance. Over the years, I've had many individuals ask me about what is it like to have an airline pilot career. Well, it's interesting that in many cases, it hasn't been necessarily the young person or an individual who is wanting to explore the question. It is a parent, it is someone else that is asking that question for someone else. And that is where I think there is generally an attempt to find out some information and maybe relate it to a grandchild or a child considering careers. What I really want to emphasize with this is that this is like most careers that are going to involve a huge investment of time, money, expense, and patience. Most of all, patience to get where you think your image is of what this career is, because it's pretty glamorous in the minds of many people and intriguing. And as you look at this picture here, this is going to be the world that you operate in. It's not the world that man was created to be in. It's a whole nother environment. It's God's world. But it is an area that really requires some true desire. It requires some real talent to be able to operate in this area that is more than just having an interest in flying. And those are the things that I want to cover with you. So just topically, what I'd like to really address at this point is this desire, is this a sincere desire that comes from you to want to have an interest in this career and explore becoming involved in it? It's a huge investment of time. It's an investment in studying and financial expenses, and they go far beyond anything you may have anticipated associated with this career. It takes several years to get to the level of qualifying to fly for a major airline. That depends on a path that you take to become qualified. Today, an awful lot of individuals are using a civilian path, going through flight schools, getting some flying time after getting your licensure, up through commercial and instrument pilot, and then going on to build up some flight instructor time. And that is generally in relatively simple aircraft. And you're going to go into a world of a complex operation of the aircraft. And I'll discuss a lot of those details as we go along in some future modules about the difference in that world. Another path that some people take is the military. And that would be after spending some time in the military, a commitment to the military. When you may retire, then you will also have an opportunity to be extremely well qualified for an airline. At that point, for a military trained pilot, you almost have an automatic employment opportunity at an airline, even in times when there isn't as much hiring going on in the industry. Another area that we'll cover, and I'll cover in some detail here too, is it's a very irregular lifestyle. It has a different work environment. It has a different human factor environment that you'll be involved in and how you live your life, both personally and professionally. It really is an irregular lifestyle for marriages and for raising a family. And I think those are some important things that you need to know, and we'll cover some of that. Now, one of the areas that generally pilots or potential pilots are really attracted to is the salaries that you may hear associated with this. And there's no doubt that at some point, they get pretty attractive. But the real deception about this is it really takes years to get there. This is not something that happens from when you become employed at an airline. There's a lot of variables that go into what this career is in terms of working conditions and salary conditions in a seniority system. So what I'd like to do is cover those kinds of things. And as I've emphasized in early module, the big thing that is different is covering the cockpit working environment. A lot of human factors there that go well beyond what you would encounter in any other occupation and career. So again, I just want to, at this point, take a look at this particular scene. It's awesome to be up there because what you're going to do is be in God's world. There's going to be a lot of things that you'll have an opportunity to see and experience that are some of the most privileged opportunity of work environment than you will ever have anticipated or experienced anywhere else. Now, most of the time you'll be operating in conditions and scenes such as this. One of the great in this career, when you have these kinds of conditions, it's a pretty routine and non-threatening environment to operate in atmosphere and weather-wise. And generally, you're going to be operating in these kinds of conditions maybe 85% of the time. I'll put a general percentage on that, and some of that will be a little variable. Anyway, these kinds of conditions are mainly what you have most of the time. So it's once you get trained and you get experienced in this environment, it's relatively routine. Now, this is a pixelated picture here about what the other environment is that you're going to be working in from time to time. And here's where we wind up having some little experience when you first come into this profession in operating in these conditions. Even the airlines now have backed up from years ago when I started, where this kind of condition, you just took the little old lady from Pasadena to point A to point B, and this would not stop you from doing that. Obviously, over the years, we've learned that this has a big threat to safety in some situations, and so the system now backs away from some of those earlier philosophies, but nonetheless, you still operate with these conditions with margin of safety, and you have systems and stakeholders that are involved in the process here to make this a heck of a lot more safer than it was but nonetheless, this is what you're going to be involved in at times, and it takes a certain experience and knowledge and expertise to operate in these environments safely. So get ready for this, because this is what's coming too, as well as those beautiful days and opportunities you have in a flying environment. What I'd like to do at this point is provide some bullet points to summarize some of the things that we've talked about and maybe expand on a few of them in some details. As we talked about earlier, one of the things that I think is most important is look at a lot of the different conditions that are associated with this career at the present time and what you can anticipate in the future. Most of all, if you're going to do this and all that is going to be sacrificed, really have a strong, deep desire for this profession, because you're going to have to fall in love with the effort as well as the result. Now, another thing I'm bringing up here, there certainly is an aptitude to perform in this profession. If you have a background in education that covers the sciences, math, critical thinking is really important, and problem solving. And the other ability that is maybe not necessarily thought of, but is very important, is the ability to multitask. Now, I can tell you, again, as I've said a number of other times, with some of my time and experience in this profession, there are some individuals that get into this endeavor and they really lack some of the ability to multitask and some of the problem solving that's associated with it, where just lock up. So, evaluate your personal abilities and see that they are adaptive to this profession. The other thing that is a subtlety about this too, that some people have a problem with, is that's operating in this three-dimensional environment. Now, you may say, what the heck is that? Well, you need to, I think, to have some experience with going up in an airplane, even if it's familiarization, even if it is taking some time and effort to maybe have some flying lessons and see if you're really comfortable with operating in what is not just one-dimensional with a 0.5% into a second dimension, but you're flying in an egg when you operate an airplane, and being able to handle all parameters of vertical latitude. And it is an aspect of this profession that some of us don't necessarily have. So I would just suggest that you do your best to evaluate that as well. We've talked about this, a lot of conditions and variables that are associated with how I'm going to prepare for this profession in training. And here's one of the things that I think is most important, especially in this time and age. What are the future forecasts for the profession of being an airline pilot? That's always been a question that most of us have kind of ignored. You just expect you get in it and it's going to be endless. But I don't think that's the case here in the future. I would really do some research and do your best to have some understanding about the unique conditions that are associated with being an airline pilot, because a lot of the dynamics are changing as they have in my lifetime, but they certainly are in yours. And I'll cover a little bit more on this, because I think the unmanned area is something that is going to be most important to consider for the future and how you can adapt to that. If you're married, you really have to have a supportive wife and family in this, because there's no doubt this profession has an impact on them and your children more than you would expect. You're going to be living on the road. The airline profession is 3 to 4 days a week away from home. It has that aspect to it, and I think it's something that you need to be very aware of and have an understanding with your family if you're just getting into it. So the big thing is, there's a lot of other variables, some of which I'll touch here. There'll be an awful lot which I will discuss as we go on in future modules. We get into specific situations and specific conditions that I will discuss with you. But there's a lot of variables, and you have to be ready to accept those things. Here's another thing that is pretty significant about this profession if you go on with a legacy carrier, even regional carriers. Am I willing to live in a big city environment? Because as you think about this, all the occupations with the airline legacy carriers are all in major cities. And that is a different kind of environment than maybe you grew up with, that you're used to. And you're going to be at a crew base that is in one of the major cities of the country. And with that, you'll have a decision about whether I'm going to live in the area. Even at that, it's probably going to be a fair distance from work, unless you're really willing to have interior city living. But will I be commuting to that base from outlying areas? Whether that is an hour and a half to some suburban place around a big city, or whether I'm commuting from another location and flying into my work at a base. As we delve into this next segment here, what I'd like to do is just mention that if this is going to be a second career for you, where you're maybe starting out in your 40s and even 50s. I mean, recent experience indicates that many people were hired in this huge hiring wave since COVID with all of the major airlines, that they really had to change the ability to be able to hire experienced pilots, and a lot of people are attracted to this career as a second career, and there have been opportunities for a lot of hiring for middle-aged and even pilots in their 50s. But that probably is going to change in the future. So just recognize that if you get into this profession at a time where you're actually making a second career choice here, looking at the time frames associated with it to get back to maybe what you gave up, that's a pretty serious consideration. Let's look at some of the options for going into this career with the types of training that are available to you. Certainly you can do the civilian flight school. A lot of them out there throughout the country, and very good schools. They vary in degree of quality, but you certainly will have your choice at some very good training that's available to you. Now that'll be the long route. It'll take 3.5 years. Some individuals, maybe with a total immersion, have been able to have a shorter time period to get to being eligible to be hired by a regional carrier or a legacy carrier. But it's long, it's a big expense. Most of the time, these schools are in the $85,000 to $90,000 range for the education and the experience you're going to get with them. So just know it takes a long time. There's certainly extended training time associated with it. Now the other is the military. And if you do through the military, a couple things. I mean, number one, have a desire to serve your country. There's a need for that. The flying careers in the military are really exciting. You get an opportunity to have experience and be given experience and responsibility that goes far beyond whatever you'll get any other way, and you get it a lot earlier in life. But anyway, it's a great option for a post-military career to enter into the airlines. And the big thing about it is you are a very qualified individual when you come from that background. And as I mentioned here, if jobs are available or if they're limited, you will have the best opportunity for being hired. Now, the other thing that is a change in the profession here in this day and age is that flying is really computerized operation to fly an aircraft, to set it up with the systems, even if you're flying manually. And then monitoring is a new skill and a new priority in flying aircraft these days. You have to have a discipline and a desire to recognize that you must constantly monitor the aircraft with your eyes, even in discussions with one another. You're not getting focused on anything to distract you from monitoring the operation of the airplane. It's a different game. So, with that, these are differences. Get to know automated flight skills. That is going to be one of the main purposes of what we're going to do in the future with these modules. It's my desire, it's my objective, it's my goal, it's my passion. It's my passion to help you develop these automated flight schools with these training modules that I will have. Another thing that I'm saying here too, that as you think about this career, recognize now in this new technology age, gamer skills are really more oriented toward this career than manually flying skills. Now, a short story on an experience that I had with a young lady who was into her commercial flying is with one of the flight schools and anticipating an airline career. I was invited to talk to her, and I mentioned this, and you know, she had such a misconception about what flying is today with the airlines, which was her goal. She thought it was going to be flying, manually flying airplanes, and she was really disappointed to hear that it was computer operation. Now, I don't know why that was the case and why she maybe wasn't aware of that at this point, but nonetheless she was. And I felt sorry for her because I think that was such a significant change for her that she was maybe either somehow disappointed, maybe recognizing that this isn't what she anticipated after making this big time and expense commitment. I just hope that that transition of mind is something that she was able to adapt to. I felt very uncomfortable talking to her after, in retrospect, letting her know that this was the game today as an airline pilot. So with that, just recognize, like everything else that's going on in our world here today, anticipate that the AI is going to be a big part of this world. And I also include in that, I think you've got to be very much aware that unmanned flight is in the future for this profession too. A lot of people would disagree, but there's already efforts to do that, and there have been training experiences and experiments with this area in commercial flying already. Don't discount that's maybe where it's going to go. And that's why it's going to be important for you to have these computer skills to fly in this profession. So that's again why I say, have some real, do some studying, have some insights into what to expect in the future with this profession. Here's another thing that is important to understand about this profession. It operates on a seniority system. The airlines are a system of where you have a seniority number once you're hired, and what's predicated on what you fly, what kind of trips you get, your pay. All of these things are tied to a seniority system directly and indirectly. Another thing that is most important, health, habits, and making a serious commitment for your health and your well-being is really important in this profession. A lot of us encounter some conditions of health where you maybe aren't qualified to fly. In the worst cases, some people's career is terminated well before retirement. You have to recognize that this is an important part of what you have to commit yourself to is good health habits, good mental health habits as well. Consider your family situation and the priorities with you as a family person and your family itself. Certainly, as I mentioned earlier, in this career, you're going to have some decisions on deciding where to live and how to work at this profession. Whether it is going to be living in a new area that is close to a major city, or whether you're going to commute. And we'll get into talking about some of the human factors associated with that in the future. That's probably, I think, one of the most important aspects of understanding what goes with this profession. There's no avoidance of it. You will commute in this profession as situations dictate today. Again, I want to remind you that everything I'm talking about here is pretty much predicated on the fact that it's based on history and it's based on some current situations that are pretty obvious. No doubt about it. Your home life, your domestic life will be disrupted at times. It just is inevitable. I'll talk a lot more about that in the future in very specific ways, how it is affected. So with that, just be prepared. There's a lot of cycles that are associated with this. And essentially, in broad general terms, you're going to have times within this profession that there's going to be good growth. The economy's expanding, the airline is growing, retirements are peaked. So that within the seniority system, you, as well as the airline, are going to have some growth periods, but then you're going to have times I call stagnation, where things just seem to just be constantly in a holding pattern in terms of your seniority, in terms of your pay. And there are times in this profession, historically has happened, I think, a lot less in this day and age. I think airlines try to really prevent that. But if things get bad enough in the economy, if things happen within your particular company where there may have to be furloughs, and therefore there's even regression. So be prepared for these kinds of things to happen in this profession. It's not a constant upward movement. So in closing, in this particular module, what I'd like to do is again just summarize some of the skills that are necessary in this present environment of being an airline pilot. As I mentioned, automation. And that is where I am going to put a great deal of emphasis on making this information available to you, because I am telling you that presently in our profession, this is an area where operational skills can certainly be improved. Most of the time within the airlines, it is dependent on you personally to develop these skills by educating yourself and then having opportunities to apply it. And that is an imperfect way of doing it. And I can create for you situations and training modules that is going to illustrate and demonstrate some of these things, most of which is going to be valuable information that you need in everyday flying. The mode control panel is what is called essentially the brains of the aircraft on how it operates. Now with that, that's where a lot of your attention and time is going to be. But the other thing, in addition to learning to operate, is having skills of scanning, to observe and to know the proper functionings within the Autoflight Director system. Scanning and knowing where to scan when you execute something or when you're seeing how things are working and performing, you need to know where to look. And that is a big area that is difficult when you first come into this system to learn and to know. So we're going to solve that problem to a great degree if you decide you'd like to take advantage of what we'll offer. So monitoring the performance of the aircraft in flight. This is a very difficult situation, which may seem, well, I can't understand that. Why is monitoring the performance such a problem? Well, first of all, there's a lot of aspects of this profession that get routine, that almost gets to a point sometimes where complacency and boredom is something that you have to fight. And when you get in those circumstances and conditions, again, that's a human factor condition. But when you get in that state of mind, monitoring of the aircraft in flight becomes less attentive. And that is when things can happen. There's all kinds of incidences and reports within the airline, each individual airline, that this condition is probably one of the things that leads to most problem in flight. Some of them, most of them are going to be minor, that only you will know among one another. Often your chief pilot and the airline's going to know, and you'll have to make some answers for it. But in other situations, if you've been paying attention, you know, these are the things that get public. And some of them have been pretty drastic here lately and have had some huge consequences. And that's where we need to upgrade our ability to really constantly monitor the aircraft. So what you want to also learn here too is how to set up and modify programming within the flight management system. The FMS is one of the most valuable tools to you for not only operating and programming, but in monitoring and knowing where to go for information that's appropriate during the flight. This is also important when you manually fly the airplane, because what you have to do is display to the flight director the conditions that are being called for. And you have to anticipate these changes in flight when it's necessary. And at times it's pretty normal and slow. At other times, when you're doing approaches and some of the variables that are associated with arrival, it gets pretty busy and pretty hectic between operating the system and coordinating with one another and actually flying the aircraft. So this is probably an area that training is very good at, in programming the flight management computer prior to flight and even during flight. But it's only limited things that you're going to learn to program in flight. And we're going to go over the full gamut of being able to program this system. As I mentioned earlier too, knowing where important information is displayed. And it isn't just to monitor, but it's for making decisions during flight where ATC or conditions become variable, and what you have to do is modify the information that the computer is set up to present to you. What you may have to do is alter that information, and you need to know how to do that. And that is an area that really needs an awful lot of attention to us in our performance as an airline pilot. And knowing the sequence of operations of the auto flight director system and displays, especially during takeoff, climbs, descent, and approaches. Those are the times that it's most necessary to know these sequences and know where to look and get that information. And certainly various approaches that you're going to be making and approach profiles, there's differences in that, and there's differences in how the airplanes operate. So recognize, gang, that you're more of a computer operator, even if you're manually flying the airplane, but most of the time you're going to be on autopilot and programming the flight with an autopilot. And it just requires a different set of skills that go beyond manually flying. Manual flying is still important, but nowhere near as important as it was in the past. And I could go into an explanation on Autoland and the Autoland system. Autolands have really kind of made flying in very difficult weather conditions for landing available to us. But there's such quick operational sequences that happen during the latter part of an Autoland approach that has to be known, has to be interpreted, and has to be reacted to in almost second and half-second basis, and we're going to go over that information. So with that, we'll end here. We'll look forward to some of the future modules that we make to you. I'm going to give you some examples of some training modules here in the next few modules and podcasts that we have, and hopefully you'll get to see to some small degree what we're going to have in the future for some training events for you. God bless, and thanks very much for listening, and hope that this is going to lead to something that is worthwhile for you.